1990 Formula One Championship will be played out on the streets of Adelaide, Australia. The championship itself was locked up 2 weeks ago in Suzuka, Japan, where title contenders Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost started first and second. Their duel lasted up to the first corner when disaster struck. And a collision! Senna has been hit. Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna have come together again, and they are both off the racetrack. This is unbelievable. For the second straight year, the title had been decided with a controversial crash. In 1989, Prost won out. In 1990, it was Senna's turn.
How do you feel about being world champion? Not a bad feeling at all, is it?
Today, the final chapter will be written down under. ESPN, the world leader in motorsports coverage, presents Speed World. Adelaide, Australia, one of the quickest and certainly the most beautiful street circuits in the world, is ready to host a potential grudge match in the final race of the Formula One World Championship, the Grand Prix of Australia. Hello everyone, Bob Varsha and David Hobbs with you from our announced position, ready for the 16th and final event of the 1990 season. And David, both Senna and Prost come into this race with something to prove.
Well, they certainly do, and Senna has got off on the right foot. He's on the pole with a new record, 52nd pole of his career. Alongside him is Gerhard Berger, and I really do think that this circuit is going to be more suited to the Honda engine cars than the Ferraris.
With that, let's take a look at the way the field will line up for the Grand Prix of Australia. On the pole for the 52nd time in his incomparable career, the McLaren Honda of Brazilian Ayrton Senna, untouchable in 2 days of practice and qualifying. Outside the front row, his teammate with the McLaren Honda team, Austrian Gerhard Berger, 0.6 of a second off pole. On the second row, Nigel Mansell of Great Britain in his final race for the Ferrari team. Next to him on row 2, his teammate Alain Prost of France. Both Ferrari drivers complaining of low grip on the circuit today. On row 3 will be Jean Alesi of France in a great qualifying performance in his final race for the Tyrrell team. Next to him, Riccardo Patrese of Italy in the first of 2 Williams-Renault cars, 5 cars on 1 minute 17 seconds. On row 4, Nelson Piquet of Brazil in the Benetton, next to his teammate Roberto Moreno, also from Brazil. On row 5 will be Terry Boutsen in the second Williams car in his final race for the Williams team, next to Italy's Pierluigi Martini in a Minardi. Row 6 will be Derek Warwick of Great Britain in his final race for Lotus, perhaps his final Formula One race. Next to him, Italian Nicola Larini in the Ligier. On row 7, Satoru Nakajima of Japan in the Tyrrell, next to the Leighton House of Italian Ivan Capelli. On row number 8 will be Andrea de Cesaris of Italy in the Dallara in what could be his final Formula One race, next to Brazilian Maurizio Gugelmin in a Leighton House car. On row 9, Stefano Modena of Italy in the Brabham, his final race for that team before moving on to Tyrrell. Next to him, Johnny Herbert of Great Britain in the Lotus, sitting in for Martin Donnelly. Row 10 will be Philippe Ayot of France in his farewell performance for Ligier. Next to newman Gianni Morbidelli of Italy in the Minardi. Row 11 will be Emanuele Pirro of Italy in his final race for Dallara, next to Olivier Griard of France in the Osella. Row 12 will be Eric Bernard of France in the Larousse, next to his teammate Aguri Suzuki of Japan, coming off a great third-place finish 2 weeks ago in his home country. Row 13 will be David Brabham, the huge crowd favorite, the Australian driver in the Brabham, running before his home fans, next to Gabriele Tarquini of Italy in the AGS. Those who missed the cut, Achille Alboreto and Alex Caffey in the Arrows cars, Frenchman Yannick Dalmas from AGS, and Bertrand Gachot of Belgium in the Coloni. Once again this week, there was no pre-qualifying in Australia by virtue of the fact that the Eurobrune and Life teams have closed up shop in Formula One for 1990. Fastest in the morning warm-up was Alain Prost, followed by Senna and Berger, with Nigel Mansell fourth. ESPN Speed World coverage of the Formula One Grand Prix of Australia is brought to you by Mobil. Mobil One Synthetic Motor Oil. Isn't your car worth the extra protection? And by First Brands Corporation, makers of STP oil treatment. We'll be back to meet the third member of our broadcast team, John Bizignano, and find out who is tweaking what as we prepare for the final round of the 1990 World Championship. Stay with us. Welcome back. Adelaide, Australia, where the grid is being cleared for the start of the final event of the 1990 season. There you see Nicola Larini in his Ligier, one of many drivers who will change teams for 1991. Ayrton Senna is your pole sitter, followed by Alain Prost, the fastest man in the morning warm-up, Gerhard Berger, Nelson Piquet, Terry Boutsen, Nigel Mansell, Riccardo Patrese, and Sandro Nannini. Bob Barsha and David Hobbs with you. John Bizignano will be patrolling the pit lane in Adelaide. And it is a magnificent day. You can see the heat rising off the racetrack as Senna leads the field away on the reconnaissance lap. Temperature 90 degrees, the wind crossing the start-finish line at about 5 miles an hour, 35% humidity, clear skies, a far cry from what we saw a year ago, David.
Yep, the umbrellas are definitely called on for a different use today. All these drivers had those umbrellas over them while they were sitting on the grid last year, if you remember. At this time, this bit of road here was absolutely flooded as they go down into turn 3. A very tricky track, this. A typical street circuit, in as much as you've got a lot of these very right-angled corners like that, but still a pretty high average speed for a street circuit, well over 100 miles an hour.
Now let's catch up with John Bizignano in the pits.
Thank you very much, Bob. The real concern down here on the grid is the fact that every moment that goes by, there's more heat in the air and on the track than there has been all weekend long, especially with these concrete walls here. The hot air is retained. Very high track temperatures here. Goodyear, all the cars have started on D-type compound tires, D like in Denver, not B. These tires have never really been used before in this tough a competition, and everyone is wondering, are they going to be able to last? Benetton, the one Goodyear team, we think they're on C's. They had the tires covered up the whole time. The Pirelli boys are going out with 88 compound tires. That's the medium tires. So right now there was a lot of changing of tires on the grid. Quickly, what's happening with the cars? Senna had some small motor problems and some brake problems in warm-up. They say it's all okay now. Berger, he is in the T car because he likes the balance in that particular vehicle better. Ferrari, Prost, the T car stopped in warm-up this morning. He is in the race car. He's worried about traction out of the hairpins. Mansell is A-OK. Tyrrell, Alesi, he had switched brake rotors trying to find the right combination after practice. Patrese in the Williams, he is having minor front suspension problems, and they have adjusted that on the grid. Benetton's are in good shape. They're in such good shape they had time for a team photo this morning, although Moreno did change the clutch. Leighton House, they put extra cooling onto the car, and Brabham, they've changed both motors. Everyone from third place on down is looking for a position here in Adelaide. The tension in the competition is as fierce as ever.
Once again, we will not call the first lap of the race. We'll give you the opportunity to experience the sound as well as the sights of Formula One, unless there is an incident, and there might well be.
Well,
so much is on the line.
Turn 1 here is particularly bad for that. You remember 4 years ago, Senna, who was in the Lotus, climbed all over Nigel Mansell at that time, who was in one of the Williams cars. And turn 1 here is a tricky little left-right dogleg, pretty fast for a first turn, and not too far away from this grid.
We're ready for the start of the 500th Grand Prix in Formula One history. Turn up the volume and enjoy it. Here's your last chance this year. Here is a replay of the start. To the left of your screen, the red Ferrari, Alain Prost, jukes to the middle of the track, but he's shut out by teammate Nigel Mansell as the McLarens went arm in arm into the first turn. Ayrton Senna is your leader. Behind him, teammate Gerhard Berger in the second red and white Marlboro McLaren. I would guess is playing blocking back today, holding back Nigel Mansell in the Ferrari, and a bit of a gap there back to Alain Prost.
Alain Prost, of course, who blatantly jumped the start. It's going to be interesting to see what the French-based new FISA commission about driver standards is going to have to say about that little move, because that was clearly a jump start, and very lucky not to hit anybody.
Prost, a 13-year Formula One veteran, has been wearing his heart on his sleeve this weekend. He failed to show up for the annual driver team picture as Nigel Mansell now all over Gerhard Berger. And he will pass him. Berger, with an obvious problem, has lost the drive. I think he missed a shift. It looked like he got it going again. And now he is directly ahead of Alain Prost. And one of the Benettons moving up in 5th place. There is Nigel Mansell. A great break for him early on. There is Berger.
But seems to be back on song now. But whatever he's doing, he's certainly going to make life difficult for Alain Prost at this stage, I'm sure. A lot of acrimony been floating around since the Japanese race 2 weeks ago between both Senna and Prost in particular, but the McLaren and Ferrari teams in general are not very happy with each other at the moment.
Up the Bravo straightaway. Dequetteville Terrace here in Adelaide, Australia. Looked like Prost took a look at the inside of Berger there at one of the tight hairpins, but he didn't have the shot. Now you're aboard Alain Prost's Ferrari.
Coming into the park just behind the pit complex, which is on the right. Little right-hand sweep here. Then hard on the brakes for the hairpin onto pit straight.
All of the grandstands in front of you there are temporary circuits. Everything to the right and left of the racetrack right here. In fact, the racetrack itself was buried each year after this race. But as we mentioned, organizers have asked the right to keep this a semi-permanent circuit here in Adelaide. There has been a great deal of political controversy surrounding this race. A group calling itself Australian Non-Smokers took this race to court in an attempt to prevent the race from being televised in Australia due to the presence of tobacco advertising in the pictures. But a judge refused to hear the case on Friday, saying it had taken them too long to bring it before the court.
Well, he said they'd had the whole year to bring this case, and to bring it 2 days before the race was totally unreasonable. He didn't even bother to hear their complaint. Well, Berger seems to be back on form again now. As you can see, all these temporary curbs, they're pretty big across these city streets, and not the best thing to go climbing over. We've had a lot of people over those curbs this weekend. Nigel Mansell. Oh, and somebody coming up that
Piquet will try him to the inside of the Benetton and takes Prost for 4th place. One of the Williams cars making a move. I believe that was Boutsen looking for a spot. Jean Alesi directly in front of him. But this is your battle for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Gerhard Berger, Nelson Piquet, the winner in Japan 2 weeks ago. And behind him, Alain Prost having trouble with a Ferrari. A V10, a V8, and a V12 running nose to tail.
Next year, of course, the McLarens will have the V12 Honda engine, and the V10s, as they're using at the moment, will go to the Tyrrell team.
There is Ayrton Senna with about a 10-car length advantage over the Ferrari of Nigel Mansell. Senna will be back next year for McLaren. Mansell will not for Ferrari. We'll be back to Australia. Back in Adelaide, Australia, where 1990 Formula One World Driving Champion Ayrton Senna of Brazil and his McLaren Honda is holding station about 10 car lengths ahead of this man, Nigel Mansell, in his finest and final drive for Ferrari.
Well, there you see it. Nigel Mansell's got the fastest lap so far at a 1:22. He's got a long way to get down to a lap record time, but of course these cars are full of fuel at the moment and are at their heaviest and most unwieldy, especially where you need a lot of accelerating and braking as you do on a city street circuit such as this one.
Of course, I said it's his finest drive. That's a little bit premature, I would have to say.
We have yet to find that out.
Well, that's true.
It may well be.
Nigel's had a few good ones. Victories at Rio in his debut in Brazil in 1988, a win in Hungary. And Nigel Mansell will move on to the Williams team next year, which he says is a potential Grand Prix winner. Good look down the long back straightaway in Adelaide. Mansell to your left. Here comes Gerhard Berger, followed by Nelson Piquet. That Ford V8 engine looking very strong. In fact, Piquet among the fastest cars in a straight line, topping 175 miles an hour on that straightaway.
For some reason or other, Prost seems to be out of it at the moment, although he's always a hard one to judge at this time of the race, because he, in fact, was the fastest in the morning warm-up this morning, which must have given him and the whole Ferrari team a lot of hope for this afternoon. But the Honda engine has got such a wide power band, and in this sort of a situation, it really does make the car very drivable, although Gerhard Berger is obviously having a problem with his car, as obviously I think if Nelson Piquet gets around him, he'll be off into the distance, that is, as far as Gerhard Berger is concerned, not off the road.
As usual, our pictures are being supplied by the host broadcaster, in this case Channel 9 in Australia. Alain Prost, not a happy man this weekend. He refused to show up for the drivers' group team picture. He walked out of the drivers' meeting just 8 minutes after it began this morning, and as a result, he and his team manager were called on the carpet by the organizers and issued a formal reprimand that will go on Prost's record. And that becomes more important, as David mentioned, the new FISA Safety Council, which has been formed this weekend, although its members have not been named, will be reviewing the entire 1990 season with a view towards judging each of the drivers, the stewards, the officials, the courses, the entire length and breadth of Formula One. And the drivers in particular will have their super licenses either granted or suspended for 1991 based on the results of that committee's findings. Now, the kicker is the report is expected by the end of the year, just 8 weeks from now, and as yet the commission membership has not been named. There is Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell, with about a half dozen laps complete of 81 anticipated here in Australia. There, through the benefits of electronics, you can see where the front runners are running, basically nose to tail, still running in a very tight group here in Adelaide, Australia. What a year it's been, especially for those 6 men whose names you see posted up there, running in the top 6 points-paying positions right now. Coming into this race, only 3 drivers of the 18 that have scored points this year are unassailable. Ayrton Senna in first, Alain Prost in second, and Nigel Mansell in 6th. But 3rd, 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th, 9th, all the way to Maurizio Gugelmin in 18th place can move up in the points based on a good performance today.
Of course, the Benettons had a tremendous fillip last, or 2 weeks ago in Japan when they had that resounding 1 and 2. Of course, the most marvelous day of Roberto Marino's life. I guess he's still hardly got over it yet. And of course, the sad thing is that the guy is still not placed for the 1991 season. He is still going around knocking on doors because it's almost certain that he will not drive for Benetton. They have a problem with having 2 drivers of the same nationality in the team. And of course, he and Nelson Piquet are both Brazilian, and it looks like he's going to have to go and look somewhere else. One of the latest rumors is that Suzuki will in fact join the Benetton team, but all that will become clear as today and this weekend rolls on to its conclusion. But Marino, second in the first time he ever drove a decent Formula One car. He has a 2nd place, and he's still looking to drive for 91. Somewhat odd when you look at some of the people who are in fact driving in Formula One, some of whom have been driving in Formula One for a long time.
What are you getting at, dear boy?
I'm just hedging around.
Mansell holding station in 2nd place. In fact, perhaps closing up a little bit. Now, here's the long straightaway where the cars reach 176, 177 miles an hour. The Ferrari does not appear to be making a dent on the McLaren, but the Ferrari is generally acknowledged to be the better handling machine. Here comes Berger, followed by Piquet in the Benetton.
The Ferrari certainly, I think, handles better in those high-speed situations like we had in Portugal and Spain, where there's some incredibly fast sweepers. Through this tight stuff, the McLaren seems to be able to hold its own. But, of course, the car that does excel in this sort of condition is the Benetton, which has done well in a number of places like this, but the V8 just hasn't got quite the grunt that is required to get past the multi-cylinder, the V10s and the V12 engine cars. I feel absolutely convinced if Piquet could get around Berger, he would in fact drive away from him, but it's very frustrating for him at the moment because I know he's quicker through these corners but just can't capitalize on it.
2 weeks ago, Nelson Piquet picked up his first victory in 3 seasons and made a big hit in the press room after the disaster at the first turn. He walked in, sat down, said, "Hello everyone, my name is Nelson Piquet." We'll be back. Back on the streets of Adelaide, Australia, where Nelson Piquet has gotten around Gerhard Berger's McLaren, and as you called it, David, he is just driving away from him.
Well, the thing is, can he drive away enough to catch up with Nigel Mansell and do to Nigel Mansell what he did to Alain Prost fairly early on? Obviously, that's going to be a lot easier said than done, because that is the most frustrating thing about being stuck behind another car, is while you watch your adversaries disappear into the distance. And of course, once a big enough gap is formed, it's very, very hard to make it up. Talking about big gaps, Nigel Mansell right close to Ayrton Senna now.
Well, maybe I'm right. Maybe this will be Nigel's finest drive for Ferrari. You can bet the Englishman would like nothing better than to open and close his career at Ferrari with a victory. Listen to the sound of the V12 Ferrari. Well, only a brief notion there. We'll get back to it. You can see just how close Mansell has come.
Seems to make up quite a bit of time on entering these corners. closes up on the braking and turn in. Actually leaving the corner, the Honda engine manages to do its stuff and keep Senna in front. But he is coming under good pressure here from Nigel Mansell. But Senna, of course, unfortunately, from time to time, we have aberrations like we saw in Japan. But generally, he drives an incredible race with his head and is a very good pace setter at setting himself and his tyres. We don't know what tyres these guys have got on. Most of them are trying to get through without a stop.
Using a very soft D Goodyear compound, the softest tire Goodyear makes for these Formula One machines, the same tire they used 2 weeks ago in Japan. Mansell now closing up, although the Honda able to pull away here.
On that acceleration there, he pulls away. The thing about the soft compound is they could have just slightly misjudged it, because today is the hottest day of the weekend so far. Obviously, they're going to put more laps together here than they are any other day in practice or qualifying. And it could be that as they come up to around about the 20-25 lap mark, they are going to decide they should have made a change.
11 laps complete of 81 scheduled. Nigel Mansell, with his cap set on closing his Ferrari career with a victory. Ayrton Senna has been quite upfront about it. He says he's having trouble concentrating this weekend. He was able to get himself together to capture that 52nd career pole position for this race, but he said he has been losing his concentration a little bit as a result of the fact that he has already clinched the championship.
These Formula One cars, of course, continue to astound everybody, me not least of all. His qualifying time this year, a 1:15.6, is a cool second quicker than he was last year. I mean, everywhere they go, these cars pick up tremendous amounts of speed. It's quite incredible, really, the way they do improve these cars year after year.
You're aboard with Nigel Mansell in the Ferrari, who's driving with a sore knee. He injured it playing soccer with his Ferrari mechanics on Thursday afternoon.
The thing about this race is it always has that tremendous end-of-term atmosphere. The drivers really hang loose after the race, of course, and even during and up to the race, there's a lot less, I don't know, the pressure seems to have gone away. As you've got here, a driver like Nigel Mansell's going to move on next year. He'd love to win this race for Ferrari, but it can't be quite the same pressure on him as when he joined the team 2 years ago.
If you have a little spare cash in hand, you can pick up a Formula One mechanic's uniform. They sell off their equipment after the race, or at least the mechanics sell their team uniforms. Quite a pretty dollar, I might add.
One of the most amazing things, of course, is to see them pack up here. We ought to do a time-compressed video of that one of these years. It's quite amazing to see these guys, obviously the mechanics, of course, working like maniacs to get all this stuff in boxes because they want to go out tonight and have a good time.
Back to third position, Nelson Piquet, Gerhard Berger right there in the number 28 McLaren Honda, and Alain Prost holding station in fifth position.
Alain Prost, of course, always drives a very heady race as well. Probably taking great care of his tyres early on here. Certainly does not want to stop if he can avoid it, and would just dearly love to see one or two of his closest competitors do just that, which would make a big difference straight off the top. Senna, Mansell, Piquet, Berger, Prost, Patrese.
The gap a second from Senna back to Mansell, then 4 seconds back to Piquet. Ayrton Senna looking for this 27th career Formula One victory that would tie him, ironically, with Jackie Stewart, the former career leader, till he was surpassed by Alain Prost's 44 victories. Jackie Stewart is covering this race for Australian television, and he and Ayrton Senna had quite a coming together on the air about Senna's conduct in that crash 2 weeks ago in Japan, as we watched the three-time world champion Nelson Piquet at work. Piquet has been outspoken in his criticism of his countrymen. He says Senna flat ran into the back of Prost. Stewart and Senna had a long argument about whether or not a true champion puts himself in harm's way and gets involved in crashes. Actually, I thought Jackie put his questions fairly tactfully. Senna reacted quite emotionally, and it got wide play here in Australia. It is Senna, Mansell, Piquet, Berger, and Prost in Adelaide. We'll be right back.
Taking a big deep breath and thinking, well, it's another year, and going home looking at the children and playing with them, and taking literally probably about a week out to sort of recover, get the body back in shape, but above all turn into a family man again.
And we go to Maranello.
Take an aeroplane It will be in Adelaide. Take an aeroplane, go back to Belgium to see my son.
I would be 50-50. I decide to test new car as soon as possible or to go on holiday, because I think this year has been very, very difficult.
Go back to England to start testing the Humor engine.
Go home, be home.
Go home indeed. Go home as the 1990 Formula One World Champion, will the man in the yellow helmet in the number 27 McLaren Honda, Ayrton Senna, his second World Championship.
Well, now we're coming to the part of the race that Senna excels in most, and that is dealing with the traffic. He's a bit of a pass master, and I guess that is David Brabham, the only Australian in the race.
You're on board with David Brabham as Senna completes the pass.
So that's one around. Now, of course, Nigel Mansell's got to get around David Brabham.
Brabham has been a huge favorite with the Australian media for obvious reasons. As David mentioned, the only Australian driver in Formula One, son of the three-time world champion, Black Jack Brabham, Sir Jack Brabham. Then AGS up ahead, Gabriele Tarquini, it looks like. And immediately ahead of him, Olivier Griard in the Osella.
Of course, getting through traffic, there's a little bit of luck involved as to exactly where you catch them. Nigel Mansell there, let through by David Brabham, moved well over offline. Coming into a more complex pass, not easy for a lap driver to let people through here. You can't just suddenly magic yourself off the track to let them through. And some drivers don't appreciate that in the faster cars.
To the left of your screen, Senna has passed both Tarquini and Griard. There is Mansell in the red machine coming up behind those two slower cars. Now you're on board with Mansell. He's got him where he wants him, coming onto that long straightaway. We'll see if he can blow by them here on the Brabham straight.
Using the slipstream there to advantage. Comes down the outside, a little bit offline. Of course, he'll be on the dust and the rolled up rubber here as he brakes for this turn. Soon gets back onto line. A little bit of understeer by the look of Nigel's arms, crossed well over. And that's the sort of thing you have to be careful of early on in the race. If you've got a bit of understeer, you have to really drive around it, or oversteer, whichever you've got, because you can soon make the offending tyre even worse, and of course the problem just gets worse and worse and worse. Lapping that car, lapping that traffic has in fact given Senna just a little bit of an advantage. It's pulled out a couple of seconds on Mansell. It'll be interesting to see if Nigel can pull it right back really quickly. If he does, that's a bad sign for Senna.
Understeer, of course, means the car does not want to turn into the corner. Oversteer means it wants to go faster than you do.
Understeer means you hit the barrier with the front of the car. Oversteer means you can't see what you're going to hit. Sort of.
We'd love to give you a full field rundown, but our automatic timing and scoring system is not functioning at the moment. You can see the battle for the lead right now. It is Senna and Mansell, 2.7 seconds apart, although that is due to the traffic, no doubt.
And we can't look out of the booth window because for some reason or other they put some tape up here, probably to keep the sun out, and we can't see out the window very well.
Mansell pulling a tear-off of his visor.
In fact, you could see the oil when he was passing those cars down the Brabham straight. The camera lens, well, not the lens, but the little shield turned over. There's some oil coming off somewhere, and of course the only where it can be coming off is Senna. So maybe the McLaren Honda is dropping a little bit of oil.
Back in Victoria Park, a horse racing track, when it's not being used for Grand Prix racing once a year. Once again, all of the buildings you see in your picture there are temporary. They are erected solely for the purpose of this race at a cost of nearly $1 million. Left and right jink. First two corners. Now a run down a neighborhood street. Sharp right-hander.
This is East Terrace they're going onto here. Adelaide is a squared-off city and surrounded by north, south, and east or west terrace. Now they're just coming down towards North Terrace, which will be running across the end of the road here. A beautiful city, great, laid out by Colonel Light back in the late 1800s, and full of parks, and one of the first designed cities, well, the first designed city in Australia.
It is also the sister city of an American town. I believe it's Austin, Texas, that is the sister city of Adelaide, Australia. Another slower car up ahead.
Is it Bertrand Gachot? Have a job to be, as Bertrand Gachot didn't even make the race. That is, in fact, Pierre-Luigi Martin.
I believe that's Gianni Morbidelli.
Yeah, right, Morbidelli, going very slowly.
Replaced Paolo Barilla in that car. Morbidelli will be Pierluigi Martini's teammate of the Minardi team next year.
That team, of course, in for a very nice 1991, we hope, because they get the Ferrari engine. One of the first teams ever to get full factory Ferrari engines to use other than Ferrari cars.
Now that things have calmed down a little bit, we'll come back and talk a little bit about the driver and mechanical changes coming up in 1991 when we return to Adelaide, Australia. The 16th and final event of the 1990 Formula One World Championship is taking place on the streets of Adelaide, Australia. Up ahead of Nigel Mansell, you saw leader Ayrton Senna get the wheels of that McLaren right up on the blue and white curbing. Mansell clobbering the curbs now, too. I wonder if the tires are going away. Oh, we've got a spin. This is David Brabham spinning in front of his home fans. That might well be a replay, although there's no indication. Up front, Senna and Mansell once again nose to tail.
So Mansell was able to make that gap up. Of course, we've been away for just a few minutes. We're not quite sure what traffic Senna had to deal with. See the way the McLaren gets away there so well out of those tight corners? Because it's always just a little bit disconcerting when you're in the following car. It always looks like you're making up more than you actually are.
The Ferrari drivers have complained this weekend that they're not getting good grip off the very tight corners. There is a replay of David Brabham's spin.
The trouble with these street tracks is that when you spin and go over those curbs, it's not liable to do the underneath of the car a lot of good. And of course, the underneath of these cars is almost as important as the top these days because they rely on it so much for the ground effects, even though these, of course, are flat-bottom cars. Nigel having a little bit of correction there as he comes off the corner. But generally speaking, his car seems to be putting the power down pretty well. You don't see him doing much correction on exiting these corners. His main problem to me seems to be turning in. He seems to be using more lock than I thought he might be, which would indicate he's got a bit of understeer. But nevertheless, he is right with Senna as they go through the streets of Adelaide.
On the long Brabham straight now. Let's see if Mansell can close up and perhaps use that Ligier just ahead. Back. We've got a collision.
That is Patrese.
Riccardo Patrese spinning off after locking up the wheels, but he kept the engine fired and away he goes.
He lost some bodywork, didn't he? Somebody lost some bodywork. He nudged the back of that car.
Minardi ahead of him.
No doubt we'll get a replay of that in a minute.
Senna closing in. I believe that's Philippe Ayot in the Ligier up ahead. It is Ayot who drifts right out of the middle of the racetrack. There's a collision, Morbidelli and Patrese.
Oh, it wasn't something flying off, it was the yellow flag in the background. Well held there by Riccardo Patrese. Oh, crikey, getting around that back car. Fairly fraught moment for all concerned, but everybody came out of that with bodywork and wheels intact.
Not much runoff room, as you can tell, for cars that are reaching over 175 miles an hour. At the start-finish line, they're running at about 145.
And some of these corners are very fast. That little complex there, that left-right complex is very fast with no runoff area. Down to Brabham Straight.
When we get back aboard the in-car camera, as you hear the revs go up, you can tell when the driver is planting his foot to the floorboards, and that is a very dicey proposition in these Formula One cars when you have 750 horsepower coming in very, very quickly, which is why David referred to this race course as point and squirt. You've got to make sure you've got your wheels pointed in the right direction when you put your right foot down.
The absolute point and squirt circuit, of course, is Phoenix, which will be the first race of the 1991 season, coming up in just a few months from now. These guys don't have a very long off-season.
Glad you mentioned that, David. March 10th, we will open the 1991 season in Phoenix, Arizona. We'll be followed 2 weeks later in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And then we will travel to all of the same countries that we've seen on the 16-race circuit this year, winding up back here in Adelaide, Australia on November 3rd. Some of the courses have changed, however. Phoenix will have a course change for next year, reputedly to make it faster. Montreal will have to undergo further inspection after an incident with flying manhole covers destroyed a couple of cars in a sports car race this year. They're going to have to fix that. The French Grand Prix will move from Paul Ricard to Magny-Cours on July 7th. The following week, the Silverstone course in Great Britain will show a whole new face. Budapest, Hungary is going to need some changes to make the passing easier on August 11th. Spa-Francorchamps, same problem in Belgium, August 25th. And the Spanish Grand Prix, despite signing an agreement for 5 more years at Jerez de la Frontera, it will move to Barcelona, Spain in anticipation of the 1992 Summer Olympics. 16 races coming your way, at this point at least 15 of them, excluding Monte Carlo on May 12th, will be coming your way here on ESPN. We hope you'll be with us. There is Alain Prost, who has not been having the best weekend here in Australia, despite being fastest in the morning warm-up. He is still running back in 5th spot.
Piquet did, but...
Bless you, my son.
Prost, going back to last year, Prost has in fact done the fastest lap. Piquet got around Berger and pulled away from him.
And there you see the gap.
Yeah.
From 1st to 5th, 13.5 seconds. So the top 5 cars still very tightly bunched here in Adelaide. Alain Prost will be looking to pass Gerhard Berger in the McLaren just ahead of him. Plenty of action still to come from the Australian Grand Prix. From high above the street circuit in Adelaide, Australia, you watch the battle for the lead here in the Australian Grand Prix. Bob Varsha and David Hobbs with you. John Bizignano in the pit lane. You are aboard the second-place machine of Englishman Nigel Mansell, trying to close the gap once again on 1990 World Driving Champion Ayrton Senna of Brazil. Losing ground here on the straightaway, David.
Senna seems to put a bit of daylight between himself and Mansell, coming down to a very tricky maneuver here. That's Nicola Larini, is it?
I believe it is.
Gave them plenty of room in the end, but very difficult for the lap guys as well to just move offline, because once you move offline on these circuits like this, which aren't used very often, the dust, and they're pretty slippery places for these racing cars. They're designed for buses and trams and trucks and not racing cars.
Or in the case of this particular portion of the course, thoroughbred racehorses. Victoria Park in downtown Adelaide, Australia. On a very warm day, 90 degrees, Senna and Mansell both pounding the curbs. Mansell has that look about his driving right now as he closes up on Senna.
Nigel was 4th fastest in this morning's warm-up. Obviously either made a little change, it's given his car something good, or Alain Prost, who was quickest, made a little change which took something away from it. It doesn't take much to change these cars enough to just lose a significant amount of ground per lap.
As we watch this battle for the lead, let's talk a little bit about some of the mechanical and driver changes coming up next year. The AGS team will remain with Cosworth Power at last word, and their drivers Yannick Dalmas and Gabriele Tarquini will be back, although no announcement has been made. Benetton will remain with Ford V8 Power. Nelson Piquet will return that second seat. The best ride in Formula One still up for grabs as the season comes to a close. Brabham will switch from a Judd V8 to Yamaha V12 Power. Stefano Modena will move on to the Tyrrell team. David Brabham is reputed not to be coming back, but Martin Brundle of England will return to the Brabham team, for whom he drove last year in 1991. The Coloni team will probably still have Cosworth V8 Power. Bertrand Gachot says he does not want to come back, but there's been no announcement whether Coloni will even compete next year after a terrible year in 1990. Ferrari, of course, will have its venerable V12 engines. Alain Prost will be back to be joined by young Frenchman Jean Alesi. The footwork team, once the Arrows team, they'll drop the Arrows name next year, will have the Porsche V12 engine next year for Michele Alboreto and Alex Caffey. That is confirmed. The new Jordan Formula One team will be using the Ford V8 engine, no drivers named as yet. The LaRousse team will lose their Lamborghini V12s and go to Cosworth V8 Power with Eric Bernard and Aguri Suzuki, although Suzuki is rumored to be a candidate for that Benetton seat, as we mentioned earlier. Leighton House will use the new Ilmor V10 engine with Ivan Capelli and Maurizio Gugelmin. Ligier will pick up Lamborghini V12 Power with Terry Boutsen and Eric Comas replacing Philippe Ayot and Nicola Larini. The Lotus team will use Judd V8 engines next year. Derek Warwick will move on to the Jaguar sports car team. Johnny Herbert likely to stay with Lotus, and Martin Donnelly if he can recover from his terrible accident in Japan. And he is making progress in that direction. We are told that Martin Donnelly has been out of his hospital bed. McLaren, of course, will go from Honda V10s to V12s for Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger. Minardi will pick up Ferrari engines, as David mentioned, for Pierluigi Martini and Gianni Morbidelli. The new Modena Formula One team We'll have Lamborghini power for Nicola Larini and Eric Van de Poel, another newcomer to Formula One. Ayrton Senna closing up and passing the Tyrrell. Well, perhaps not. Satoru Nakajima there is going to give the position. He dare not cross swords with Senna again after what happened in Sao Paulo, Brazil earlier this year when Senna was leading the race and collided with the lap Nakajima and wound up finishing third. Nigel Mansell, the red car to the right of your screen, closing up now on the Japanese driver. You're on board with Nigel Mansell.
Nakajima, of course, the last guy in the world he wants to push off is Ayrton Senna in the McLaren Honda, because the reason that Nakajima is in Formula One really is because that he is not a golden boy, but he is a blue-eyed boy of the Honda company in Japan. They want a Japanese driver in Formula One in the worst possible way, and Honda decided that Nakajima was their man, and he's part of the reason that the Honda engine is going to Tyrrell next year.
Boy, it amazes me how close these Formula One cars get before they pull out of the slipstream for the pass. Continuing our driver lineup for next year, no word on Osella's plans. Scuderia Italia. The Dallara team will go from Cosworth to Judd V10 power. Andrea de Cesaris probably likely to stay with that team. J.J. Leto will replace Emanuele Pirro. The Tyrrell team will go from Cosworth V8 to Honda V10 power. Stefano Modena taking over for Jean Alesi. Satoru Nakajima will be back with Tyrrell. And the Williams team will have Renault power. Nigel Mansell, of course, coming back to replace Terry Boutsen. Mansell will partner Riccardo Patrese. Nigel Mansell has set fast lap of the race at this point at a 1:20.611. We have 28 laps complete of 81 scheduled. Your points-paying top 6 positions: Senna, Mansell, Piquet, Berger up, Gugelmin off in one of the Leighton-House cars. After Berger in 4th position comes Prost in 5th, Boutsen in 6th, followed by Moreno, Patrese, Warwick, and Alesi rounding out the top 10. Stay with us. Back in Adelaide, Australia, Ayrton Senna continues to lead Nigel Mansell. Here comes Satoru Nakajima, who has been lapped in the Tyrrell machine. There is Nelson Piquet at the bottom of your screen. He is running in 3rd place. 11 seconds behind leader Ayrton Senna. 30 laps complete. We're working lap 31 of 81 scheduled. Here comes Alain Prost running in 5th position. And likely not a very happy man right now. He is 16.5 seconds behind arch rival Senna. Nigel Mansell turned in the fastest lap about 4 laps ago. There is your leader and the 1990 world champion, Ayrton Senna.
Running the race then, he's just done the fastest lap, dropped in a 1:19.7, which is over 4 seconds slower than his qualifying lap, which of course was another absolutely unbelievable lap, doing a 1:15.6, over 7/10 of a second quicker than his teammate Gerhard Berger, a second quicker than both Ferraris. Nigel Mansell using all the curb there and a little bit more. And of course his 52nd pole of his career, which is nothing short of absolutely astounding. And this could well be his 27th win.
This is the 500th Formula One Grand Prix race since the first one in May of 1950, when royalty turned out to watch Giuseppe Farina win in an Alfa Romeo.
I was there.
A respected figure, no doubt.
Absolutely. Hey, Dad, look at that, Dad, hey, Dad.
That was your son talking?
Yeah, he's still at it.
Nigel Mansell winding through the streets of Adelaide. The gap opening up just a little bit. It has increased and decreased since the opening laps of the race.
Nigel Mansell knocked a few hundredths of a second off Senna's time, also a 1:19.7. But Senna gradually pulling away now. Some empty stands there, a sight you don't often see at Grand Prix races pretty well anywhere except Spain, and certainly not here in Australia.
We mentioned earlier this race is $3.5 million in the red after 5 years. This is the 6th Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide. You wonder why they keep bringing it back? Well, last year's balance sheet saw that Over $20 million were spent in Adelaide as a result of the race weekend activities, and $6.7 million in tax revenues were collected. Kind of makes that $3.5 million debt after 5 years of racing look a little small. And helps explain the magic of street racing throughout motorsports. Sports cars, Formula One cars, Indy cars. Speaking of Indy cars, of course, the projected season opener for the CART PPG Series at Surfers Paradise, Australia, has been much talked about. Senna closing in on Johnny Herbert, who waves him around the right-hand side. Herbert sitting in for Martin Donnelly in the number 12 Lotus machine. William Stokan, who is president of CART, is here in Adelaide this weekend. He was seen strolling the pits, arm in arm, virtually, with Bernie Ecclestone, the vice president of the worldwide governing body that runs Formula One.
That's not arm in arm, that's called a hammerlock.
Much talk about whether or not that IndyCar race will in fact go on as scheduled next year here in Australia.
Well, the smell of compromise is in the air from that press release that we saw about inviting other people to take part in the race. Even Formula One cars, the Formula 3000 cars, should be allowed to take part. The word cart was never mentioned. It was a very studied press release. Very delicately put.
We'll have more Monday night on Motor Week Illustrated about the latest developments in the CART saga in Australia.
Well, the gap between Senna and Mansell stretched to 3.5 seconds, and Senna is now 15.5 seconds in front of Nelson Piquet. So, although Piquet got around and pulled a little bit away from Berger, he's only a second in front of Berger. He never was able to put enough together to catch up with the leading duo here. So, Nelson Piquet running a good third, but not likely to make any impression on the leading two cars. Mansell goes round Johnny Herbert. Herbert giving him a bit of room there. Herbert probably going to stay with Lotus next year, but Lotus, bit of a question mark hanging over the whole team, really. They've lost their Lamborghini engine. Ligier are going to be the only users of that engine next year. And, of course, they've lost their Camel sponsorship. So they've got some pretty high-level people thrashing around trying to put things together for them. But, as yet, we have no word of what Lotus are going to do next year, which would be a terrible shame for a team that's so established, that really the second in terms of longevity to Ferrari now, with a great winning record over the years. But the last 2 or 3 years have seen a terrible decline in the team, and it'll be a terrible shame to see them go, of course.
Lotus second among teams in all-time Formula One victories, ahead of McLaren, ahead of Williams, ahead of all the rest but for Ferrari. We'll be back in a moment. In the midst of traffic, the red Ferrari of Nigel Mansell running in second position here in the Australian Grand Prix, about to overtake Ivan Capelli in the Leighton House machine.
Capelli's arm out there, waving Nigel through. Of course, the Leighton House cars next year, as you probably mentioned, of course, are going to use the Ilmore V10 engine, which is coming on. American people will be used to the Ilmore in the Chevrolet engine. In the IndyCar series, of course, is an Ilmore.
Englishman Andy Wallace has been signed to do the development work on that engine. Of course, Andy made himself famous with American racing fans when he won the 24 Hours of Daytona a year ago.
Talking about American fans and American drivers, to continue our Lotus saga, I'm no historian, but it was about 1970-71 that Mario Andretti got into a Formula One car for the first time, which was a Lotus at Watkins Glen. And much to the distress of the Formula One regulars, of course, planted it firmly on the pole. And, of course, was ultimately to go on some years later, end of the 70s, 78, to win the World Championship also in the Lotus. There we see John Lisi off the road, backing her up.
Very indelicate place, too. He's right at the head of the start-finish straightaway. Kicks it around, gets it back in gear as one of the Delaras comes up behind him. That's Emanuele Pirro, and right behind him, the race leader, Ayrton Senna, with Nigel Mansell right on his gearbox. I take that back. That was not Mansell. That was Olivier Gréard being lapped for the second time right behind Senna, but he won't be there long. You can tell the speed differential between the elite car in Formula One right now, the McLaren Honda, and the somewhat lesser machine of Olivier Gréard. Of 26 starters, 20 cars remain in the race with 33 laps. Let me check that. More than 33 laps complete. Fastest lap was set on lap 32. That was Nigel Mansell. down to 1:19.7. We have 37 laps complete of 81. Now Senna draws a bead on Jean Alesi. The top 10 cars are all on the lead lap, and Alesi is the 10th of those machines. Nigel Mansell goes around the Ocello of Olivier Grouillard. Grouillard has raced in the United States this year for the first time, driving a Ferrari GTO car in IMSA competition.
Back into the park area here. Under the shade of the old eucalyptus tree, the ubiquitous gum tree of Australia, which is now spreading all over the world, but the only country in the world where it's really indigenous is here. All those gum trees you see in California, this is where they all started all. Down the pit straight, Nigel Mansell right with Senna as they go into turn 1. No, it wasn't Senna.
No, it wasn't Senna. It was one of the Dellaras.
Mansell saying it said only that had been.
If only that had been the right Marlboro-sponsored car. Unique body shape, sort of a teardrop shape on that Ferrari, different from all Formula One cars. There's a replay of Mansell's pass on the Osella. Nigel unhappy with the way Olivier Grouillard handled that corner, I gather. Either that or he's waving to the grandstands.
Not shaking the loose change out of his sleeve, that's for sure. Flicks onto the Brabham straight. Alesi in front of him. Alesi running in 10th. Now, obviously, a lap down, as Senna has already passed Jean Alesi. Put him a lap down.
Speaking of loose change and Nigel Mansell, the gap 5.1 seconds. That'll shorten up in a hurry. Rumor has it Nigel might be getting as much as $12 million from the Williams team next season.
Pretty distressing.
With 38 laps complete, the gap from Senna to Mansell, 5.1 seconds. Piquet, 11 seconds behind the leader. Gerhard Berger in 4th, 14 seconds back. Alain Prost, 17 seconds off the pace. And Terry Boutsen sliding back in the Williams, 37 seconds back.
But at the moment, Terry Boutsen, the last of the point-scoring positions. He's in 6th position, which would be worth 1 point to him. And, of course, last year he had that great win here in the wet.
Terry Boutsen did not have kind things to say about the Williams team. Well, I should take that back. He had some kind things to say, but he also said some interesting things in reflecting upon his years with the Williams team. For example, when he won at Hungary this year, Terry said he returned after his press interviews to the team trailer, expecting perhaps a bit of a celebration. He said there was no one there. In fact, he said it wasn't until the following Tuesday that he got any recognition from the team when team owner Frank Williams sent him a congratulatory message by fax.
Yes, he said in fact, instead of being the best day of his life, it turned into one of the worst because he was so down after having had that great win, which it was a good win. As you say, he went back to the motorhome and everybody had gone.
And he said at that moment he knew that he was not likely to be back with the Williams team. And he began talking to other teams. He will be with Ligier in 1991. Your top 6 with 39 laps complete: Senna, Mansell, Piquet, Berger, Prost, and Boutsen. Stay with us. From the green light of the final event of the 1990 Formula One season, this man, the yellow helmet of Ayrton Senna of Brazil, has led. He is the leader at this point, and increasing that gap now over the second-place machine of Nigel Mansell. There is Ivan Capelli in the aqua-colored Leighton House machine under heavy pressure from Pierluigi Martini in the black and yellow and white Minardi, and behind them, it's like Terry Boutsen moving up. Boutsen, the number 6 runner in the race right now, and he's going to want to get around these guys.
And of course, they're going to want to get around each other, and probably not too aware that he's there.
We are just past halfway, 41 laps complete of 81 scheduled. Terry Boutsen losing ground to this man, Ayrton Senna, who crosses the start-finish line to complete lap 42. Roberto Moreno turned in the fastest lap a few moments ago, but that has now been changed. Ayrton Senna has just turned a lap at 1:19.387 seconds, an average of 107 miles an hour.
Which for a street circuit is extremely quick.
Right now, Moreno is the next target on the agenda of Senna. That's the Benetton just ahead of him.
Brazilian, about to put another Brazilian a lap down, but Marino driving extremely well. Had a great race 2 weeks ago in Japan. I'm looking at Senna's tyres. That left front tyre, it shows up a rather ominous looking black stripe around the outside of his left front, right to us. But it comes and goes somewhat, so it may be okay. But it could be a line of blisters for me.
Now here comes the second place Ferrari of Nigel Mansell, who has lost ground noticeably. I wonder if his tires might be going away. That's Nelson Piquet coming up behind him now.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Nigel come in for a tyre stop. He just looked to me like he was struggling with the front end of his car just a little bit. Nelson Piquet, of course, has had a great record this year of going through these races non-stop. Always gone for a slightly harder tyre compound. Oh, well, that's what happened to Nigel's tyres.
Right. There's a replay of Nigel Mansell going well off and back on the racetrack just ahead of the Lotus of Derek Warwick, who in turn was being borne down upon by Nelson Piquet. Now that we've solved that mystery, I would almost assure you that Nigel Mansell will be in to change tires. They started on a very soft compound Goodyears, and that little Shimano couldn't have done him much good.
It certainly put him back into the clutches of Nelson Piquet, and of course has given Ayrton Senna a big break, which will mean that from now on, of course, Senna himself can drive. Whoop, there we see it all happening from the driver's seat.
That's the way to change direction in a hurry, and there's much of that soft compound Goodyear tire left on the streets of Adelaide as Nigel Mansell gets back to it.
More being left as we drive out there. This will take a lot of pressure off Senna, who will be able to drive much more to a pace that he wants, as opposed to that which is dictated by his competitor. As you can see, the gap has gone rocketed from just 4 seconds to 16.
So the future Williams driver, Nigel Mansell, instead of trying to overhaul the leader, now has to do everything in his considerable powers to hold off Nelson Piquet, his former Williams teammate.
If Nelson Piquet was to have a second place here, that puts him in a pretty good chance of coming third overall in the World Championship, depending on where Gerhard Berger. Gerhard Berger's 5 points ahead of him at the moment. So it could be that Nelson Piquet could take that place away from him if Gerhard scored no points today, which at the moment, of course, he looks as if he is going to score some points for his fourth place where he's running at the moment.
9 points for first, 6 for second, 4 for third, 3 for fourth, 2 for fifth, and 1 for sixth. 11 top scores count. Gerhard Berger has 10 scoring finishes this year, so he can take any points he wins today. Will not have to drop any. Ayrton Senna has scored his 11 finishes for the year, third being the worst scoring finish for Senna this year, so he's going to have to finish first or second, and he is running first right now, to score any points at all. Mansell very slow in that hairpin. Piquet all over him in the Benetton, but he just cannot get around him until he gets a little bit more racetrack to work with. And that moment could be coming up shortly at the start-finish line. The only other likely opportunity would be on the backstretch, the Brabham straightaway, so Piquet is going to want to get by Mansell now if he can. They will take the first corner side by side, and Mansell will concede. Oh, and Mansell definitely having traction trouble at this point. Piquet quickly away. Mansell having grip problems in the Ferrari after that spin. Wouldn't be surprised if we see the bright red number 2 into the pits for new rubber before too long. Nelson Piquet takes over second place in the Grand Prix of Australia. Back in Adelaide, Australia, Bob Barsha and David Hobbs with you. You're watching the battle for fourth position. There is the former world champion, the red number 1 Ferrari of Alain Prost of France, trying to overhaul the Austrian Gerhard Berger. And just ahead of him, Nigel Mansell.
Nigel Mansell obviously having a...
That was flame from the exhaust, not contact between the Ferrari and the McLaren.
Looked pretty close to me. There's trying to get around Nigel Mansell. Is Nigel Mansell going to make a pit stop? Can't be far away, I wouldn't think. In fact, looks like it's coming up right now. Let's have a look at the replay here. Berger thought he'd go down the inside, didn't win.
Mansell is pitting. Let's get down to John.
Nigel Mansell, who just a couple laps ago was right up the gearbox of Ayrton Senna, here in his last race for Ferrari, spun his hopes away. 4 new tires. He continued around a couple laps, but obviously wasn't happy with the handling. 8.26 seconds for the Ferrari boys.
The pit exit launches you directly into the flow of traffic here at Adelaide. Nigel Mansell away, and we'll have to see how much time he can make up now on new tires.
So, Nigel Mansell back in fifth spot now at the very least.
There is Berger and Prost still battling. Now this is a battle for third place. The red and white car to the left of your screen is Berger. He is third, behind Ayrton Senna and Nelson Piquet. 28 seconds in arrears. Prost just behind him. Mansell back in fifth position, but 40 seconds off the pace being set by Ayrton Senna, who has led the race from the start.
Thierry Boutsen running a fair way off the pace there, a long way behind, really. Nearly a minute down. So one can assume that before the race is over, he will almost certainly get lapped. But Senna, more and more, has the pressure taken off him as Nigel, first of all, spun, then changed his tyres. Ooh, a bit of smoke coming out the back of Berger's McLaren there. Could be just breathe of smoke, but it could be more serious than that. If it's coming out enough, of course, the person here it's most serious for is Alain Prost.
We saw earlier it appeared that there was oil on Nigel Mansell's Ferrari as he followed Ayrton Senna very closely, so the McLarens may be spewing a little bit.
Hot day. Everything will be running pretty hot. Engines, gearboxes.
Of course, when your engines are revving to about 200 revolutions per second, you can imagine that there's a lot of wear and tear going on in there.
A bit of friction developed, isn't there? Generated.
Prost now dropping back on the long Brabham straightaway. De Quetteville Terrace.
Whoa, and
Berger is right off. Almost into the southbound lanes on De Quetteville.
That was a good view, wasn't it?
If you had to go off, that was the place to do it. The turn with the largest amount of runoff. I beg your pardon, now they're on the Brabham straightaway.
That's actually the very fast sweeper onto the Brabham straightaway, which is a very, very fast corner.
And so Prost inherits third place in the race. We may not have heard the last from Alain Prost. He may yet be a factor in the victory here in Adelaide.
Interesting to see if Berger fits here. Oh, here we see it. Up on the curb there, which upsets the car a little bit and turns him into that other curve.
The wheels never locked up. He just turns it, puts his foot down.
But only just missed that barrier where he goes back onto the road. And, of course, when you jump behind the curb, there's even less grip than there is on the racetrack itself, because it's not the sort of place that many people go.
Berger not in the picture. Alain Prost pulling away. Fast lap in the race still belongs to Ayrton Senna, set lap back on lap number 41 at the halfway mark in this 81-lap race. We now have 49 laps complete. The leader, Ayrton Senna, working lap 50. Berger continues to lose ground. He is well out of the picture now as Alain Prost makes his way around. The 35-year-old three-time world champion, and a man who could easily have won a couple of others. He missed one world championship by a half point as you watch your leader, Ayrton Senna. Missed another championship by 2 points. Of course, here is another man who could well be a three-time world champion. Could have won 3 in a row, but for the collision in Suzuka, Japan last year that gave the title to Alain Prost. There you see the relative positions of the points-paying cars in 1st through 6th. Senna has not put a wheel wrong all day. He has led the race. Well, he has led the weekend since the first get-go. On Friday afternoon in the first qualifying session, he turned in 2 runs that were more than a second faster than anybody else could get close to. On Saturday, in hotter weather, he was not able to improve, but very few other cars did, only about half the field, and nobody was able to get within a half second of him. And look at the gap back to Nelson Piquet.
Another fastest lap for Senna on that lap, lap 50, 1:19.3.
Here comes the AGS of Gabriele Tarquini. Now here comes Roberto Moreno, who has been lapped. Is it Moreno or... No, this is Piquet. There is the second place car. There's one of the lapped Ligets, followed by another Liget. And here comes Alain Prost in third position. So Prost not far from Piquet, who is well down to our leader, Ayrton Senna. About a 6-second gap from Piquet to Prost. That battle for second place taking place about 23 seconds behind leader Ayrton Senna.
It'll be interesting to see if Prost slips in the fastest lap here. Now he's got rid of Gerhard Berger, who's probably been holding him up most of the race, a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if he can pick up. He has obviously picked the pace up, and pick up the pace enough to set the fastest lap.
Alain Prost, 35 years of age. He says one of his proudest possessions is his club license for soccer in his native Saint-Chamond, France. He still has the license, I guess is the best word for it. A little picture of a little broken-nosed kid. Soccer is one of his great passions, along with golf. There is your leader, Ayrton Senna. 7 cars remain on the lead lap, your top 6, and Ricardo Patrese in the Williams. We'll be back to Adelaide, Australia in a moment. Back in Adelaide, Australia, there is Roberto Moreno, the forgotten Brazilian in Formula One. Been racing in the shadow of countrymen Ayrton Senna, Nelson Piquet, and Maurizio Gugelmin. There goes Piquet, by the way. Piquet running in third position. I think that's second position.
Second position is Nelson Piquet.
As we have completed 50 laps in Adelaide, Australia. We mentioned earlier that some $20 million has been generated on race weekend here in Adelaide. The reason for that are the ticket prices, about the most expensive we've seen all year in Formula One. The best grandstand seat for today's race goes for $320, which explains all those empty seats we've been seeing in the grandstand.
Yeah, that's a good excuse. That's a good enough reason to have an empty seat.
At the other end of the scale, for children under 12, pensioners like David Hobb, and the disabled, you can get a $20 seat. My seat's worth $20. Ayrton Senna still with the fastest lap. I thought old Nige might turn in the fastest lap. The only guy out there with new tyres. There we see Lacey going by Gabriele Tarquini. And here comes like the Philippe Ayot, I think, there in the blue Liget, being passed by Alain Prost,
which has taken him a couple of laps to get around him too, because he was with him just a couple of laps back.
Let's reset the gap. Ayrton Senna by 26 seconds. He has added 2 seconds in the last 2 laps to his lead over Nelson Piquet in the Benetton Ford. Alain Prost running 35 seconds off the pace in third. Gerhard Berger fourth, 39-second backs. Nigel Mansell has not gained ground after that tire stop. He is the only leader to pit for tires, and he is 41.9 seconds behind the leader. Terry Boutsen, 106 in arrears, and Ricardo Patrese, 7th and last car on the lead lap, 115 down. So Ayrton Senna is stretching his lead. Roberto Moreno runs 8th, 1 lap down, followed by Jean Alesi, Johnny Herbert, Satoru Nakajima, and Pierluigi Martini. 2 laps down in 13th is Nicola Lorini, Philippe Ayot, and Emanuele Pirro. Stefano Modena in 16th, also 2 laps down. 3 laps down, Gabriele Tarquini, the black car you see to the left of your screen. He is in 17th place, and he is the last car of the 26 starters still running. Alain Prost, who once studied to be a cabinet maker until his passion was caught by karting. Paid $120 or the equivalent thereof for his first kart back in the early 70s. By the end of the decade, he was a Formula One driver, and he had not paid for a ride in the interim. Now making something on the order of $10 million with Ferrari. He will be their undisputed #1 driver next year, although he will lose the #1 on the nose of his machine to his arch rival Ayrton Senna.
Yes, and that won't sit well on his shoulders. Alain Prost certainly venting his feelings against Senna, making all sorts of comments. The press in Europe the day after the Japanese race was absolutely full of comments of Prost saying how Senna disgusted him and described him in all sorts of ways as sort of a non-member of the human race, and he's not human, and I'm not going to race against people who are not afraid to die, and all sorts of comments came out the next day. A lot of it in the press.
gap from second to third, 11.6 seconds. Nigel Mansell closing in on Gerhard Berger. That's the battle for fourth place on the racetrack right now. Neither of these guys having a good day. Mansell had a big spin and was forced to pit for tires. One of the Ligets going around Tarquini there. Berger will go around the AGS car. Berger will also take the Liget, and Nigel Mansell hugs his gearbox and slides through as well. Get a pencil and paper, and I'll read off the entire 1991 Formula One schedule for you. I'll do that after our next commercial break, so you have a moment to get a piece of paper. Nigel Mansell taking a look at Gerhard Berger inside and out. Berger, I think it's fair. Whoa, we've got Alesi going off. Whoops, it's going to be hard to get back on the track from there, particularly if you nudge the tires. Now that's Satoru Nakajima. Straight on.
Nakajima wants the marshal to push him back. The marshal's not too sure about that. Standing in that little bit of runoff area there.
G'day, mate. I think you got to leave it right there.
If I was you, I'd just get out and watch the rest of the race.
Mansell now obviously looking for a way by the McLaren Honda of Gerhard Berger. Ooh, there's a shot we haven't seen all day.
No. Nice bits of rolled up rubber and all sorts of other junk down there in that low camera shot.
Another view of Satoru Nakajima's exit from the Australian Grand Prix. We have 57 laps complete of 81 scheduled. We have 16 cars remaining in the field, and Nigel Mansell has completed his pass of Gerhard Berger for fourth place. We'll be back.
The only thing is maybe to have a little bit more space in the car, to change something there, because the car is very small, and for me it's okay, but for the taller driver it's a big problem.
I will probably change the rules in the cars, the flat bottom, and that's about it.
I think what I'd like to see is a little bit more room in the cockpit.
I'd like to see a rule added that no driver can drive any one car more than 2 Grand Prix per season. So then I get a chance to drive the McLaren, the Ferrari, the Williams, and everything. And I think that's a lot fairer. And then maybe the good drivers like Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, they can then drive the Lotus and the Life, just see how good they are.
I think freedom of thinking and speech is something that in the modern world should be an automatic thing to exist. And in Formula One we don't have that, as you all know, as part of the regulation. There are limitations to what we can say and state. I think this is wrong.
Well, Ayrton Senna has certainly been speaking his mind this last week. There is Nigel Mansell in the red #2 Ferrari, leading Gerhard Berger. Mansell in 4th, Berger in 5th. Your order is Senna, Piquet, Prost, Mansell, Berger, Boutsen, Patrese, Moreno, Alesi, Johnny Herbert, Pierluigi Martini, Nicola Larini, Felipe Ayot, Emanuele Pirro, Stefano Modena, and Gabriele Tarquini. 16 cars remain of 26 starters in the 16th and final event of the 1990 Formula One season, the Grand Prix of Australia.
And 8 of those 16 are on the same lap. Just to continue what Senna was saying there, when you sign on for your super license and become a super license holder, you sign a pledge that you won't in any way denigrate, badmouth, or any other way make bad comments about FISA and the overall governing body. It's a pretty heavy-handed piece of equipment that you sign there.
Here's a replay of Nigel Mansell gesturing wildly at a fellow driver. Nigel not having a good day. That's Olivier Griard he's getting all over there. Griard challenging him down the Brabham Straight. Mansell finally pulling in. He knows that he's got Gerhard Berger right behind him. Meanwhile, up front, in the foreground, Riccardo Patrese trying to stave off our leader, Ayrton Senna, who has dominated this entire weekend, fastest in qualifying, his 52nd career pole coming in, and he has led this race since the beginning. This could be his 27th career Formula One victory. I promised you a look at the 1991 Formula One schedule, or I promised I would give it to you in detail if you have your pencils and papers ready. We will begin on March 10th with ESPN, the host broadcaster for the U.S. Grand Prix at Phoenix, Arizona. 2 weeks later, on March 24th, we'll be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. On April 28th, Imola, Italy for the San Marino Grand Prix. May 12th, these cars will be in Monte Carlo. June 2nd, we'll be back in Montreal, Canada. June 16th in Mexico City. July 7th in Magny-Cours, France, which has changed from the Paul Ricard circuit at Le Castellet. A week later, July 14th, we'll be at the newly remodeled Silverstone course in England. July 28th in Hockenheim, Germany. August 11th in Budapest. August 25th in Spa, Belgium. September 8th at Monza, Italy. September 22nd at Estoril, Portugal. September 29th in Barcelona, Spain, another new circuit. October 20th in Suzuka, Japan. And November 3rd, 1991, right back here in Adelaide, Australia.
Just while you were starting that list, Ayrton Senna seemed to have a bit of a problem on one of the corners. He was right with Patrese, and as you can see, he's now slipped back. And I saw him looking down, because it's hard to look down on these cars. I'm wondering if he's got a problem with his gear selection.
On the Brabham Straight, 25.4 seconds, the gap from Senna to Piquet. We'll monitor that gap and see if Piquet is able to gain ground. Senna closing in on the Williams once again. May have just missed a shift off that corner. Fastest lap, Nigel Mansell weighs in with a 1:19.060, 172 kilometers. It's 106.951. Check that. It must be 107 miles an hour, because Senna was listed at 1:19.302 at 107.248 miles an hour. At any rate, it's very fast.
I'm not surprised that he's done the fastest lap.
There is Senna walking back. Senna has climbed out of his car. The race leader is out. There you see the McLaren Honda. He obviously had a more severe problem than we thought. Oh!
That is a severe problem. Now that is a turn-up. In spite of what happened in Japan 2 weeks ago, it's very unusual to see him make a mistake. I imagine he was having a problem with his car, I'm almost sure. And of course now we're looking at our race leader for the second race in succession.
After going 3 years without a victory until 2 weeks ago at Suzuka, Japan, Nelson Piquet, the three-time world champion, is now in a position to win his second straight race. Take it easy, Nelson. You're all alone at this point. There is Gabriele Tarquini climbing from a smoky AGS. Things starting to happen quickly in the final 30 laps of this Australian Grand Prix. I cannot get over watching cars like Ayrton Senna go straight on into the barriers like that at great speed and climb out and walk away. It's just uncanny. With 62 laps complete of 81 scheduled, Ayrton Senna is out of the Australian Grand Prix. The fire is put out on Gabriele Tarquini's AGS, and we'll be back in a moment. There will be no 27th victory for world champion Ayrton Senna, but this man, Alain Prost, is closing in on Nelson Piquet, and that has great implications here in the Australian Grand Prix at Adelaide. And coming up later today, the Winston Cup Championship continues, the penultimate round in Phoenix, Arizona. Coming your way here on ESPN at 3 p.m. Eastern Time live this afternoon, it's the Checker 500. Mark Martin just 45 points ahead of Dale Earnhardt for the $1 million Winston Cup Championship. With 2 events to go, it should be great. Coming up at 3 p.m. live, the Checker 500 from Phoenix International Raceway, right here on ESPN. And we have had a tremendous turn of events here in Australia. Nelson Piquet is your leader. Alain Prost closing in by tenths of a second each and every lap.
Well, he closed in by 300 tenths on the last lap. He pulled up 3 seconds in 1 lap. And of course, as you say, this does make incredible implications, because if he had obviously won last week or 2 weeks ago in Japan and was to ultimately win this race, or even come second in this race,
Alain Prost would have defended his 1989 World Championship. I wonder if that's crossed his mind.
I'm sure nothing else has crossed his mind.
He knows that Senna is out. If he had won 2 weeks ago in Japan, where they had that incredibly controversial first corner crash, and by the consensus, Senna was the guilty party driving right into the back. Here is what happened to Ayrton Senna. Watch this impact.
Locking up the left front there, and
you could see the wheels were turned. The car simply would not make the corner. While he was more than 25 seconds clear of the field, Ayrton Senna went straight onto the barriers. I wonder if we'll find that it was another one of those mental lapses, such as he had 2 years ago in Monte Carlo when he was leading.
Looked like he was trying. His left front locked up, the unloaded wheel. as he turned into that left-hand turn. It looks as if he left his braking just a little bit too late, but of course we don't know. We've had a lot of brake problems here in practice. A lot of cars have had brake problems. It's very, very hot today. It could be that his brake fluid was on the point of boiling, and he's had a very long pedal or some problem with the brake. So you certainly couldn't condemn him just out of hand. But even so, when you get to his level of competition, it is unusual to just make a mistake like that.
In fact, the Tyrrell team changed brake manufacturers on John Alesi's car. He lost brakes totally and went off the racetrack in Friday's session. Changed brand of carbon fiber or carbon impregnated brake pads and discs.
Of course, the spoiler in all this could be this man here, Nigel Mansell. As we keep on saying, he's got new tyres. He's only 4 seconds behind his teammate Alan Prost, and it certainly would be no skin off his nose at this point to try and get around Prost and put him away, because he is leaving the team when all said and done. Things have not worked out terribly well between himself and Prost over this year, at least.
There are the relative positions of the cars. PK at the top of your screen, the leader.
Great jubilation and excitement in the Benetton pit at the moment. I mean, this would be just like all their dreams come true. But of course, Prost really giving their man a tremendously hard time. Here we see him, in fact, Nelson Piquet coming up.
It is Piquet.
Grouillard, everybody's favorite when it comes to lapping.
Piquet over Prost by 8.1 seconds now. Prost delayed getting around Stefano Modena Tyrrell. Nigel Mansell just 4 seconds behind his teammate in third, followed by Gerhard Berger in fourth, Terry Boots in fifth, Riccardo Patrese in the sixth and final points-paying position, and the last car on the lead lap. Roberto Moreno runs behind Patrese in seventh, followed by Jean Alesi, Pierluigi Martini, Nicola Lorini, Philippe Bayot, Emanuele Pirro, Stefano Modena. 13 cars remain, Olivier Grouillard, Senna's car, has not been removed from the standings yet because he has yet to be more laps behind than poor Olivier Grouillard.
If you cast your mind back to the beginning of this race, Nelson Piquet got around Alan Prost pretty early, pretty easily early on it seemed, and managed to pull away. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that this car uses the V8, the Ford V8, and it carries a lot less fuel at the beginning of the race than the V10 or the V12 engine cars. And it was all part of the formula that John Barnard and Ford put together, that the V8 would be okay because you can start off a lot lighter on the grid. And of course that will all be blown apart next year or the year after for sure, when they put the minimum weight of these cars up and take away some of the aerodynamic assistance, and that will put the V8 at a bit of a disadvantage.
Formula One engineers have been meeting and confabbing over the regulations for next year. Wings will be shorter, the overhang will be less, the cars will need to be more flat bottom, shortening the diffusers that generate the tremendous downforce, 3 and 4 times the weight of the car that sticks them to the racetrack in the corners. Cockpit dimensions will be larger to accommodate the drivers. The cars will be subjected to even heavier crash testing in order to protect the drivers. The fuel tanks will have to be more carefully protected. Another advantage...
That is one of the advantages of a V8, of course, is that the fuel will all have to be contained within the chassis. No side tanks or wing tanks at all allowed. It has to be between the driver and the engine. Of course, if you've got a V12, which is a much longer engine than that, it makes the whole car rather long. Ooh, bad traffic. Here's Moreno, Prost, Mansell, and is that Pirro?
Prost in front, Moreno, Emanuele Pirro, and then Nigel Mansell is desperate to get around that red Dallara. And he manages it on a short run down to East Terrace, but he still has Moreno in the multicolored Benetton in between himself and teammate Alain Prost. This could be an interesting battle. Now there are 2 cars once again. Prost has gone around, I guess that's Grouillard once again in the Osella. Grouillard running a mere 6 laps down to the field.
Nigel Mansell very quick into that complex area as you saw him catch up with Moreno. A bit unfair to compare, of course, Moreno being held up by Grouillard.
We'll take a quick timeout and be back to see if Nigel Mansell can indeed reel in his teammate as the battle continues here in the Grand Prix of Australia. In the Grand Prix of Australia, Nigel Mansell running in 3rd position to this man, Alain Prost, and the leader, Nelson Piquet, has reset fast lap over 108 miles an hour average late in the going with about 11 laps remaining in the Grand Prix of Australia. There is the gap from 1st to 2nd. As Nigel Mansell works to close it up, we'd like to tell you a little bit about the technology of Formula One, specifically helmets. There you see David Brabham, the Australian driver, sitting in his Bell helmet. Well, Bell engineers have come up with a new system for form-fitting, custom-fitting their helmets to the driver. That is not the new helmet, no. That is a special form that is used. Here the Bell helmet engineers prepare this quick-setting plastic compound, which is poured into the mold placed over the driver's head. After about 4.5 minutes, the compound is set. They take the form off of the driver's head, knock out the resulting mold, and they have an exact silhouette of the driver's head.
I was going to say gently remove it from the mold.
They can then make a plaster cast of the driver's skull and form fit the helmet for optimum comfort and safety for Formula One drivers. The gap decreasing. Here comes Nigel Mansell. You can bet there are no team orders on this occasion. Final race in his Ferrari career for Nigel Mansell.
A cool 2 seconds under the old lap record there by Nigel Mansell. All sorts of helmets, of course, are worn in Formula One. A lot of money changes hands now for these guys to use the various helmets. But Bell, of course, have always been at the forefront of safety. And personally, I've always worn a Bell for the 30 years I've been racing.
We're trying to get back into Formula One. None of the drivers, with the exception of Brabham, were using Bell helmets, I believe, until recently when Bell has begun contacting drivers about using their equipment once again. Look at Mansell close up on his teammate, Alain Prost. A lot of frustration might come out in the moments to come. 71 laps complete, 10 laps remaining in the Grand Prix of Australia. Nelson Piquet is the leader. He is 10 seconds up on this battle for second place. We'll repeat, Ayrton Senna, after leading for most of this race, crashed out of the event. Alain Prost is running in second position. Had he won 2 weeks ago in Japan and run second today here in Australia, he would have defended his world championship. As it stands, he lost it to Ayrton Senna in that controversial first corner crash in Japan. And right now, Nigel Mansell might well make that all moot by demoting his teammate to third. Mansell is just flying.
As we keep saying, Mansell, the only guy on fresh rubber. Some of these tires must be getting pretty skinny around the edges now. Prost, of course, is a master at preserving his tires, there's no doubt about it. But even so, he can't beat a good new set of tires, assuming, of course, those are right. You know, these tires have a certain hand-built quality to them, and sometimes you can put on new tires that are no better. Nigel makes the pass at the end of Brabham Straight. Now, of course, the thing is, can Nigel, in just the 10 laps left, demote Piquet to second? It's going to be a tough order, that.
With 8 laps remaining, he has a very difficult chore ahead of him. I don't think he can do it, but you never know. The final 8 laps of the 1990 Formula One World Championship season could be the most dramatic of the year if Nigel Mansell can get close to Nelson Piquet. He's just driving away from Prost right now. The tires really must be the difference. Mansell spun and even pitted, and yet he was able to come back and run down the second-place car of Alain Prost. Here's another look at that pass, and Prost never really challenged him.
I would say from the way that Nigel was going earlier on before his made his tyre stop that he had the best race setup in the end. It certainly looked after this morning's warm-up that Prost had, as usual, set his car up very, very well for the race, but somehow he seemed to just lose touch early on, and there must have been just something slightly amiss with his car, which Nigel did not have, although Nigel ultimately had to come in and change tyres, but that, in the end, has worked to his advantage.
Down the Brabham Straight at over 175 miles an hour. Here comes Nigel Mansell. Look at the gap he has opened up over Alain Prost.
Prost, of course, unluckily is caught behind one of the Ligiers. This is something you can do that with. Got past him on the straight. V12 power telling there.
14 cars remain in the running. 6 cars on the lead lap. Piquet, Prost, Mansell, Berger, Boutsen, and Patrese.
Around that last little right-hand flick into the right-hand hairpin leading onto the pit straight. The heat haze coming off the track here as Nigel comes over that very, very slight crest there. A good low camera that. We haven't seen much from that camera yet.
Great picture from TV9 in Australia. 7 laps remaining. Nigel Mansell running in second position. in his final race for Ferrari. Meanwhile, the oldest man in Formula One at 38 years of age, Nelson Piquet, leads the race looking for his second straight victory after 3 years of drought. Back at Adelaide, Australia. With 5 laps, there'll be 4 to go. This time around, Nelson Piquet and Nigel Mansell are nose to tail. Piquet bobbled on the racetrack. Mansell has closed up. And the Battle of Australia in 1990 is far from over with 4 laps to go. 3 to go next time by. And now a slower car up ahead. Riccardo Patrese in the Williams to be overtaken by Nelson Piquet and Nigel Mansell. Former teammates with the Williams team, and not the best of friends. Bitter rivals in 1987 when Nigel Mansell, leading the championship, contending for his first world title, crashed in Japan, was not able to go on, and Nelson Piquet won it by default. Now Piquet and Mansell, Piquet in the Benetton, Mansell in the Ferrari, will decide the Australian Grand Prix. Don't forget, coming up later today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, the Checkered 500 and that great battle for the Winston Cup Championship. Bill Elliott is the defending champion, but all eyes will be on Mark Martin and Dale Earnhardt. Earnhardt has the better finishing record at Phoenix, so he could close that 45-point championship gap in a hurry. Coming up later today, the Checkered 500. And Prost is off the racetrack, the same point that Berger went off earlier, and he keeps his foot in it.
But he went round the back of the curb instead of going over it. Now, the Nelson Piquet has got to make sure that these corners here work well for him, because he wants to pull onto that Brabham straight with as much daylight between himself and the Ferrari as possible, because that's the sort of place where the Ferrari, they go down here, then there's that fast sweeper onto the straight, and Nelson's really got to make the best of this, because he wants to keep that big gap between himself and the Ferrari, because this is the danger point for him.
Having passed Patrese, there are now 5 cars on the lead lap. Terry Boutsen, the next one to be passed, if they can catch him. He is about 15 seconds ahead of them right now. It is Piquet. You see the gap to Mansell running first and second. Prost 15 seconds behind, although it'll be a little more than that the next time our electronic scoring system recycles as a result of that off. Gerhard Berger runs in 4th. Terry Boutsen 5th. Last car on the lead lap. 6th is Patrese, followed by Roberto Moreno, Jean Alesi, Pierluigi Martini 2 laps down, Nicola Larini likewise, Philippe Alliot 3 laps in arrears, as is Stefano Modena, Olivier Griard and Emanuele Pirro are out, so there are 12 cars remaining with 2 laps to go.
Crowd here starting to go wild as Nigel Mansell, who's a big favorite out here in Australia, pulls up on Nelson Piquet, but I'm sure that Nelson Piquet's heart's in his mouth, but he's a very experienced campaigner, and I don't think he's going to be flustered here too much.
Not with 3 world championships under his belt. 3rd among active drivers in victories. Prost with 44, Senna with 26, Piquet with 21. 2nd to Senna in poles, 51 to 24. 2nd to Prost in fastest laps, 34 to 23. 2nd to Prost in all-time points.
Nigel Mansell using all the road there and a little bit more as he goes up over that curb.
Piquet is also 2nd to Riccardo Patrese in all-time starts. Patrese with 207, running his 208th Grand Prix today, the 500th Grand Prix of all time. Nelson Piquet running his 188th.
Nigel Mansell awfully close as they come into the stadium here at Victoria Park for the very last time, well, the last time but one. This is it, start of the last lap.
So the Formula One season that began 16 races ago in Phoenix, Arizona, right here on ESPN, will end on the streets of Adelaide, Australia, half a world away, with a battle between old rivals Nelson Piquet getting a little sideways there in the Benetton. Piquet giving it everything he's got. Nigel Mansell's going to have to close up.
Black traffic coming up here. You can't see who it is. It's Stefano Modena.
Modena in the Tyrrell. This is where Mansell has to close up. This is virtually his last chance to pass on this next straightaway.
Ooh, we've got a draft there from Modena, which is going to help him.
There is Boutsen in the foreground, the 5th place car. Mansell going to try for both corners. Oh, and he has to lock him up. He had to get on the brakes at the last instant as Piquet shot from left to right across his bow. Dicey moment there for Nigel Mansell.
Very dicey moment. I thought that was going to take Nelson's rear wheel off and Nigel's nose. That seems to have decided the race right there and then.
They better get out of this replay of the incident or they'll miss the checkered flag. It is out. Flagman Glenn Dix does his patented finish line routine. First, Nelson Piquet. Second, Nigel Mansell. The Benetton team has their second straight victory.
And of course, that does in fact rocket Nelson Piquet to third place in the championship standings. He'll have to lose a couple of points. We'll have to use 1 point. But he still ends up third.
Nigel Mansell trying very hard to get alongside Nelson Piquet. I think he might have had a word for his old teammate. There is Alain Prost, who will finish the race in third place.
Well, Nelson Piquet certainly shut the door on Nigel Mansell, but it was a legitimate door-shutting move, unlike 2 weeks ago when really the door didn't have to be shut, it was already shut. Prost was in the corner when when Ayrton Senna ran into the back of him. That's not to take away from Nelson's win today. A well-judged race, and I think, as you say, that Mansell's going to pull up alongside him and congratulate him.
Stefano Modena inserts his Tyrrell in between. 22nd career victory for Nelson Piquet, and as you say, David, well earned. We'll return to Adelaide, Australia after this. Once again, the streets of Adelaide, Australia have been taken from the race cars and returned to the people of Adelaide. Another season of Formula One racing has come to a conclusion. ESPN Speed World coverage of the Formula One Grand Prix of Australia has been brought to you by Alpine Car Audio Systems and your authorized Alpine dealer. Alpine, standard equipment in every Lamborghini made. By Quaker State, the Big Q is one tough motor oil. And by Acura Automobiles, experience precision-crafted performance. Here's a look at the final results of today's Grand Prix of Australia. On the podium, Nelson Piquet with his second straight victory over Nigel Mansell and Alain Prost of Ferrari, Gerhard Berger, and Terry Boutsen filling out the top 5. The second 5 led by Boutsen's Williams teammate Riccardo Patrese, Roberto Moreno of Benetton, Jean Alesi in the Tyrrell, Pierluigi Martini, and Nicola Larini. Philippe Alliot, Stefano Modena, and Olivier Griard, the final 3 cars of the 26 original starters, attrition claiming half of the field today. Final driver points for the 1990 Formula One season show Ayrton Senna with 78 over Alain Prost with 71. Nelson Piquet bumps Gerhard Berger from 3rd place by virtue of more victories. Nigel Mansell bumps Terry Boutsen from 5th spot on the basis of pure points. Riccardo Patrese, Sandro Nannini, Jean Alesi, Roberto Moreno, Ivan Capelli, and Aguri Suzuki finished the top 11. 18 drivers in all scored points this year. McLaren Honda with their 3rd straight Constructors' Championship over Ferrari, Benetton, Williams, Tyrrell, and the LaRousse Lamborghini team. David, your final thoughts on the season just concluded.
Well, with 2 victories in the last 2 races, Nelson Piquet pulls himself and Benetton Ford into 3rd places in their respective championships. But I think to be really competitive next year, the Ford engine needs just a little bit